welcome to the Underground, my little underground with Peter A.
It's my little underground. I'm Peter A, coming to you all the way from sunny Los Angeles, California. It's my first time on the West Coast, and so far I'm having an amazing time. And by the time this comes out, I'll be back in New York City. And I had two types of experiences here in LA, both a music and a wrestling experience. Now, I'm here for 2 nights of WrestleMania, which I'll talk to you about on the Wrestling Caucus tomorrow. So make sure you follow the Wrestling Caucus wherever you get your podcasts. And here on My Little Underground today, I'm going to tell you all about my musical experiences. So, day one here, I had lunch with my good friend of 12 years, Ariel, at the Fratelli Cafe in West Hollywood. Amazing little spot. Had a great meal, nice big burger. I needed that type of meal coming off a 6-hour flight. And they had a delicious honey latte, and it was fantastic. I loved it. I love a good honey lavender latte, but a straight up honey latte is also good too. It's fine. It was a great meal overall. Later on that day, I went over to Supervinyl in West Hollywood, and I never heard of this spot. The only record store I know of in LA is Amoeba, right? Which I'll get to in a little bit. But at Supervinyl, it's a nice little spot, very fancy, pretty chic. They have a lot of new records, great collection. However, it's a little expensive. They have a lot of records that I've seen in New York for about $10, $15 cheaper. And they didn't have a used section at all. It was mostly new factory sealed records, which is not the worst thing, but I do love a record store that has a combination of new records and used records, because I like to trade in some records as well. So I don't like record stores that don't have that. But I will say, Super Vinyl did have a record that I was looking for, and it's Earth, Wind, and Fire's Best of Earth, Wind, and Fire Volume 1, sealed at a decent price. In New York, I saw this record used for around the same price that I paid for. I should have bought it then, but whatever. I got it. I'm happy, so I can't wait to listen to it. And it's one of the best greatest hits albums you'll ever get, because they have songs that weren't on any other albums, like one of their most famous songs, September, right? But I got it for a great price, so that's good. But if you're going to a record store, to me, you need to have a good used section. Maybe this place is new. I haven't done a ton of research on it, but a lot of new records. But of the new records, again, they had some really good stuff. Stuff that I wanted to buy, but I was not going to spend more than like $30 or $40 on a record. I just can't do that. Like, I can't. Like, I love music and I love records, and sometimes I overspend on records. But if I'm going to overspend on records, I have to buy like a handful of stuff, which I'll get to in a minute. And also later that day, I went to go see Shannon Lay at the Regent. And she was opening up for Whitney, and she was tremendous. I've been seeing Shannon Lay live for a couple of years now, and I remember seeing her with her band Feels back in the day. And it was kind of different seeing her in her hometown in Los Angeles. It was very interesting, and she was outstanding. And she played solo, no band. Most people were into her. And the one thing that I noticed that they liked about Shannon Lay was her voice. She has a tremendous voice. But for me, I also love Shannon's voice, but her music, her arrangements, and her lyrics especially really move me. And I was loving it. I was enjoying myself. I was just moved by this performance. I've seen her so many times, but this particular one was just unbelievable. But I will say that there was an excessive amount of chatter whenever Shannon would just talk to the crowd. And Shannon doesn't do a lot of deep, extensive bantering. She does not. She'll chat for a little bit, tell a quick joke, but she's funny. But she keeps it short and she goes right into the music. But when she was trying to speak, people were like just talking. And I didn't ask her about this, but I feel like she was getting a little annoyed at that. I don't know, maybe she didn't care, but I didn't appreciate that at all. I was really annoyed actually. But most importantly, what's most important here is that when she was performing, most people were into it. And she was the opening act. And she was absolutely tremendous. And after the show, after her set, I went and bought her record Geist from last year, which is outstanding, outstanding. And I saw it at Rough Trade in New York, but I didn't buy it then because I'm an idiot. But I think it felt great to just buy it from the source. I bought it right there at a normal price for a new record, and I was happy about it. Because it's one of my favorite albums of the last year, and I still think about it. And the Uber driver that I had when I was on the way to night one, no, night two of WrestleMania, the Uber driver was musical. He was a big music fan, right? And I recommended that he check out Shannon Lay because he lived in LA for a long time. And I think it's important when, if I'm in another city and I know an artist from that city and somebody from said city wants a recommendation of an artist, I'm going to recommend an artist that I think is special from that particular city. So I told him about Shannon Lay, and I hope he becomes a fan because she's tremendous. She writes amazing music. She has a good voice, has good arrangements, and tremendous lyrics. She checks all the boxes for me. But speaking of that Uber driver that I had, what's funny is that I'm going to a wrestling show, but I'm having this music conversation with this Uber driver, right? And we talked about Earth, Wind, and Fire, Stevie Wonder, Jay Dilla, Homeboy Sandman. It's really cool to see that Homeboy Sandman, a man who has no social media, has this large reach. It's amazing. I love that. And we talked about legendary black punk bands like Death, Bad Brains, and Fishbone. So that was really cool. Usually a lot of people don't like chatty Uber drivers, and I think I'm one of those people, but this is the kind of conversation that I just can't escape. Like these deep music conversations that I live for that. And I had another one of those conversations that I will share in a little bit because on day two of my LA trip, I went to the legendary, the almighty Amoeba Records in Hollywood. When my good friend Ariel took me here, and we're both pretty musical. I think I'm a little bit more nerdy than she is, but she still loves music. She still has a passion for it. Enough to want to go to a record store with me. Going to a record store with me, that if you're going there with me, that means you also like records. Because I usually take my time in a record store, but I'm not like obnoxious about it. Like I take a good amount of time. And I want to be conscious of other people's time. So anyway, walked into Amoeba Records. I was, in the best way possible, overwhelmed. I took like 10 steps inside this place and I was just frozen. I'm like, what do I do? Where do I go? Where do I start? And it's a massive, massive place. It's huge. I did not expect this place to be this big. Like usually the record stores that I go to, especially in New York City, are not that big in size. They aren't. But this was overwhelming in the best way. You know what it looked like? Amoeba Records kind of looks like Empire Records from the movie. And I just didn't know what to do with myself. I was so overwhelmed. I was moved. I'm like, this is where I belong. I was literally, excuse the cliche, I was a kid in a candy store. Literally. But if you put me in a candy store now, I'm still gonna lose my mind because I do love candy too. Love my sweets. And this place was everything that I expected and more. Their collection was outstanding, just outstanding. And I told Ariel, you cannot let me leave here with more than two things. But she also knew that I was full of shit, that I was going to end up leaving here with more than two things. And that's exactly what I did. And to say I found some gems is an understatement. And I'll just walk you through some of the things that I found. I'm going to start with a record that really it changed how I look at music and in the best way possible. And when I first heard this particular record and this particular band, I knew that once I started collecting records, I wanted this record in my library. And that album is Vaseline's Dum Dum from 1989. And when I've heard Kurt Cobain talk about them, I went and listened to them for myself, and I was instantly a fan. Instantly. Because I am a man of melody. I love melody. And I love music that's a little bit rough around the edges. And that's exactly what the Vaselines are. Their music is rough around the edges, and they have really good melodies, and they know how to put songs together. And the songs are very short and to the point, and it's very punk rock. It really is. It's very punk, but there's a lot of. It's very catchy. It's not just like listening to like a Bad Brains record, but it has that punk rawness to it that I love. Their style of music, it's punk raw, it's melody rich and punk raw. Love it. And the label that put out this record originally was 53rd and Third. Think about that. 53rd and Third. That's a Ramon song. Think about that. It's great. But this album is fabulous. I've been wanting this physical vinyl record in my collection for over a decade, even before I started collecting records. And I'm so happy a place like Amoeba. I had a feeling Amoeba would have this record because I just heard so many great things about Amoeba, and a lot of artists that I love have been a part of their What's in My Bag series on YouTube. So there you go. Let's see. What else did I get? Oh my God. This record, this next record, I've seen it in record stores in New York, but didn't buy it because I'm an idiot. But here in Amoeba Records, I saw it here, and recently I've been thinking about this record a ton, and I have a good amount. I have a good amount of stuff from this band already, but I wanted this particular album, and that is Stereolab's Transient Random Noise Burst with Announcements. Now, that's one of the greatest album titles ever because this is how I would describe Stereolab. And I have a hard time describing Stereolab to people that aren't really familiar with not only their music but the people that they're inspired by. Because if I talk to somebody about Stereolab that's never heard of them, and I would say, okay, imagine like the Velvet Underground and Kraftwerk, and the person that you're telling this to, they're like, who are they? And then it's just like, okay, how do I describe Kraftwerk and Velvet Underground? And I usually just say, honestly, like what we know is like psychedelic pop. That's what Stereolab is. But they're more than that, obviously. They have, um, they've been described on the internet as avant pop, which is kind of appropriate because their music is very. I mean, Leticia has a pop vocalist style of singing, and it is gorgeous. Her voice is serenading. I love her voice. And the music is very wild and uninhibited and just out of control and in the best way and contained and very repetitive. Their style of music is considered motoric. It's just repetitive, locked grooves, not unlike a band like Kraftwerk or Velvet Underground or even Can. Similar styles, but tons and tons of melody. I'm a melody guy, like I just told you. I love melody. So I'm very excited to listen to this Stereolab album on vinyl and to hear Jenny on Line all 18 minutes on vinyl. To say I'm excited to listen to that is an understatement of the century. Okay, next is an album I've been looking for in record stores. But for some reason I couldn't find. I don't know why, especially in a lot of like the hip record stores in New York, like Rough Trade. And it's always is a Blue Rev, and this is one of my favorite albums of 2022. And their influences are similar to that of the Vaselines, noisy, melody rich. But the Vaselines are kind of cut from the cloth of the Jesus and Mary Chain, My Bloody Valentine. Um, and they have this shoegaze aesthetic to them, but they don't sound exactly like My Bloody Valentine. But if you listen to them, like, oh yeah, they probably listen to Loveless a little bit. And the one thing about this particular Always album is that the lyrics are just tremendous. I've listened to Easy on Your Own, one of the lead singles on this album, so many goddamn times because the lyrics are so potent to me. And it really just sticks with me. I still listen to it to this day. This album came out last year, and it's everything I love about music. Noisy, melody rich, little rough around the edges, but just beautiful. And I can't wait to listen to it on vinyl. Actually, I bought the cassette at Newberry Comics, but it was warped. So well, that's what happens with cassettes. They're a crapshoot. But anyway, can't wait to hear it on vinyl. Always Blue Rev. Next is Mr. R.L. Burnside, Mississippi Delta Blues legend, huge inspiration to the Black Keys. Dan Auerbach famously said when he was in college, he would skip class and just listen to R.L. Burnside. And what's interesting is that I spent a little bit of time in Amoeba, and after I was looking for, the Stereo Labs and the Vaselines of the world and Always stuff, I thought, okay, let me hit up the blues section and see what Mississippi guys they have. And I find the blues section. I had trouble finding the blues section, honestly. I was a little worried that Amoeba didn't have a blues section. But they did. And when I approached the blues section, there was another gentleman there, and he was an older white dude. I know some of you were thinking, Pete, why you got to bring race into everything? No, this is important. Listen. He turns to me and he says, how come every record store I go to, the blues section is the smallest? And I was like, oh my God, you're so right. Even I told him I'm from New York, and all those record stores have a very small blues section. And this dude told me something that shook me to my core. He's like, I was in Chicago and their blues section was small too. I was like, that's a bunch of bullshit. Like, Chicago is very important to blues. A lot of some Mississippi blues people migrated to Chicago, like Howlin' Wolf. Howlin' Wolf is originally from Mississippi, but he made his name in Chicago. So any record store in Chicago that has a small blues section, that's pitiful. It's pitiful. But yeah, that is so true. I'm having this conversation with an old white man, and he's outraged that all these record stores have a very small blues section. And I'm like, he's right. He's totally right. But I found an R.L. Burnside record, but what's unfortunate? A lot of record stores that I've been to, at least in New York, have almost no R.L. Burnside records. Hi-Fi Records in Astoria had some R.L. Burnside. But they didn't have the record that I was looking for. But I found this record, Long Distance Call. It's a series of recordings that he did in Europe, in the Netherlands, in 1982. And I love hearing the early recordings of these Mississippi bluesmen to catch them while they're really young. So I'm really excited to hear that. I never heard it, so I'm excited to hear it. I know I'm gonna like it because I love R.L. Burnside. He's tremendous. And that was only the first few days of being in LA, and I had this tremendous music experience. And if you're a music lover and you ever find yourself on the West Coast and in LA, you need to go to Amoeba Records. This place is outstanding. If you love music, go there. And I haven't even seen the whole scope of what they had. Their CD collection was pretty good too. And they had a whole other section. They had magazines and other kinds of collectibles. I'm like, this place is just heaven. And they had a merch section too. They had a merch section for like musicians and Amoeba's own merch. And their merch was pretty cheap, and their logo was awesome. And I bought a nice shirt. And that's the one thing that Amoeba had over Super Vinyl. One, Amoeba has a deep collection. It's uncanny, the stuff that they have. And their merch, Amoeba's merch was cheap, but a Super Vinyl, I tried to buy because the Super Vinyl's logo is really cool. I'm thinking, okay, let me buy a nice shirt. I saw their price. I saw a shirt there, $65. I'm like, $65? I mean, that's the price of a brand new video game. Like, I might as well go buy Resident Evil 4 right now. Like, I'm not spending $65 on a shirt. Like, you're out of your mind. Um, but yeah, Amoeba Records, I can't say enough good things about it. I'm like just completely overwhelmed by that place. I'm thinking after I'm done recording here, because I'm in LA still. As I'm recording this, I'm in LA. But by the time this comes out, I'll be in New York. Like I said before, I might take another trip in there. But I'm going to contain myself. Maybe get one or two things, but I know I'm lying to myself. But I seriously have to just be careful. Anyway, I'll tell you my wrestling experience here in LA on the Wrestling Caucus tomorrow. So don't forget to follow the Wrestling Caucus wherever you get your podcasts. Me and Smiley have a ton to say about WrestleMania because it was quite the experience. Anyway, it's my little underground. I'm Peter A. Don't forget you can follow me on the socials at MLU Pod, Twitter, Instagram, and that's about it. All right, later days.
My little underground.